Hey guys, so I thought I'd try something new where I went through replays of the top ranked players and mapped out all the hand traps that they activated and looked at some win percentages. Pretty exploratory stuff, but let me know what you think about it in the comments. So let's just get started. So to quickly provide an overview of what I did, I looked at the match replays of the players ranked in the top 5, and I could only do top 5 because that's still a lot of games I had to watch in detail, and I looked at all games whether the top ranked player went first or second. I took note of any hand traps that were activated by the top ranked players at any point in the game, and not just on the first turn. I also could only look at whether the hand trap was activated and not necessarily whether it resolved. This was because if I had to keep track of that, that would double the amount of variables I needed, and I was already collecting info on too many different hand traps, but it certainly would have been nice if I could have kept track of that. Lastly, just in case it gets confusing at any point in the video, just remember that any win percentages you see or any numbers you see all come from the perspective of the top ranked player and not the opponent. This will make more sense when we go over the numbers. Now, some of you may be quick to mention that Dueling already provides some stats on hand traps. While that is true, there are some limitations with that too. For example, when you look under match cards and the win percentage, this value represents the win percentage of the overall match if that hand trap was activated at any point in the match. It doesn't actually tell you what the win percentage was in that specific game where the hand trap was activated. On the flip side, then you may think, well, why not look at the singles card section? The other downside with that approach is that people who play ranked single games are probably going to be a different player base than those that play ranked matches. Not to mention your deck building may be different if you're only playing singles. Now, not to say that my approach is any better, it really is not, and it's very limited as well, but I'm just here to provide an additional perspective. So let's go over some overall numbers. Firstly, among the players ranked in the top 5 on Dueling Book that were a part of this video, most of the games, about 58% of the total, were contributed by Tri Brigade, and then you had about equal amount in 50-ish games contributed by Dragon Link and ABC, and a very small bit of Prank Kids. Now, Dueling provides replays of the 20 most recent matches, so of course, since we're looking at the game level, and with each match consisting of 2 to 3 games, that's why you see a lot of games here. In terms of game win percentages, when our top players went first, they won 78% of that game, while this dropped heavily to 58% if they went second in that game. Now, of course, the hand traps that were activated by our top players may be influenced by the type of deck they play, because let's say, for example, a particular hand trap goes really well with a meta deck, so it could be overrepresented in this video. At the same time, while that is true, you can also argue that because you're also going to see the meta decks a lot in actual competitive play, then you're going to see a lot of the hand traps that deck is playing as well. So let's cover all of the hand traps that were activated by our top players, whether they went first or second, and at any point in the game. You see that, no surprise, Ash was activated the most often at 89 times, although of course, does not necessarily mean that it resolved all 89 times. Now remember, there were a total of 252 games included in this video, but also keep in mind that some hand traps may have been activated more than once in the same game. Then we have Valor and Imperm, two similar cards that provide monster effect negation that's been seeing a lot of play lately because it's great against Tri Brigade. This is followed by Gamma, which tends to see play in almost all Tri Brigade lists, so as I was alluding to earlier, this can mean that Gamma may be overrepresented here when compared to what all decks typically play. Nibiru and Droll were next, which are typically going to be used against a lot of the combo decks, and for the most part are side deck cards at the moment, although Nibiru can sneakily see some main deck play as well. And then we have the rest of the hand traps that were not activated all that often, starting with Phantasme, which is still live against most decks. Skullmeister and Ghostball are still great cards right now in the format, with both having somewhat similar but still unique effects and stopping effects that involve the graveyard. Artifact Lancia hasn't been seeing much play as before when Dinos or Virtual World were tier 1, but still useful. Contact C I think is a sleeper hand trap as well, which can mess up opponents' plans on going into the extra deck if they can't find a way to get rid of it. Cycle Reader is purely for Drytron, but it was only activated 2 times in the 252 games that I watched, and DD Crow was only activated once as well. Both of the cards are similar in that they banish a card from the grave, but only highly impactful against select decks. Now, in terms of the number of hand traps activated in a game, in games where our top ranked players went first, they still activated at least one hand trap 58% of the time. Now keep in mind that this looks at whether the hand trap was activated at any point in the game, not just turn 1. So on top of whatever the board the player set up, they still activated a hand trap or 2, although it could also mean that maybe they just bricked on hand traps. Now while you see that 43% of the time 0 hand traps were activated by our top players, there are a couple of things to consider here. Firstly, if the opponent just scooped because they know they're not getting through the board, or maybe they bricked and didn't make many plays, that means even if our top players had a hand trap, they never got to activate it. So it's going to be a bit overinflated here. Now in games where our top ranked players went second, certainly more hand traps were activated, with at least one hand trap being activated by our top player at any point in that game about 83% of the time, and at least 2 hand traps 37% of the time. Again, similar thing to remember here, where 0 hand traps being activated will still be a little overinflated, as they may have had the hand trap but never needed to use it. So now let's look at the game win percentage based on when a hand trap was activated for a few of our most played hand traps, but I want to emphasize that these numbers are really exploratory and you should interpret them with caution because I'm not sure how meaningful the values are. Let me know your thoughts in the comments as well. Now first off, when I was doing this analysis, I noticed that games where 0 hand traps were activated had higher win percentages, and this isn't because there isn't a need for hand traps, but in situations that I mentioned earlier, where the opponent either just scooped or bricked and didn't make many plays, that means our top ranked players didn't have the need to activate any hand traps even though they had them, and in these situations their win percentages are also going to be higher since the opponent just didn't make many plays. So because of this, instead of comparing the win percentage of when 0 hand traps were activated compared to when a specific hand trap was played, I'm instead going to compare to other games where at least one other hand trap was activated. Sounds confusing, I know, but hopefully it makes sense as I go over the numbers. Now let's start with Ash. In games where Ash Blossom was activated, either on its own or along with other hand traps, the top ranked player won 68% of that game. You see that there were 83 games where Ash was activated, a little lower than the 89 times that Ash was activated that you saw at the start of the video, because sometimes Ash was activated more than once in the same game. Anyways, when our top ranked player activated one or more hand traps but anything other than Ash, they won 59% of the games. So it was a little lower than when Ash was used, although of course the win percentage in a game is determined by a lot more than a specific hand trap, at least in most cases, so keep in mind that this analysis is still very rudimentary. Next up we have Effect Failure, where when it was activated in a game by our top player, whether by itself or with other hand traps, then won just about 60% of the games. In contrast, when they activated at least one hand trap that was not Failure, they won about 64% of the games. So this is where I'm not sure if it really means anything. Does this really show that Valor is not as good as other hand traps? I would not say that. Again, this is rudimentary and there's a lot more involved in a game than a hand trap, but these were the numbers, although we are dealing with small sample sizes as usual. Then we have Imperm, which is personally my favorite hand trap because it is a Cyber Dragon card by artwork only, and in games where Imperm was activated by itself or with other hand traps, and compared to games where at least one hand trap was activated but not Imperm, the win percentages were pretty much equal at 63%. I think it's a great hand trap because it's good going first or second and can also be versatile to shut off floodgates after setting them. So no number will convince me to not play it unless it truly is bad against the top decks, which at the moment it's actually great against the top deck in Tri-Brigade. Lastly, let's cover Cyframe Gear Gamma, which when played by itself or with other hand traps in a game, the top player won only about 40% of that game. In comparison, in games where at least one hand trap was activated that was not Gamma, they won 66% of those games. I was a bit confused by this one since we're looking at situations where Gamma was actually activated, and you would think that it should provide somewhat of a boost in being able to win since it is such a powerful hand trap. But again, there's so many factors involved in leading to a win in a game that maybe in the games where Gamma was activated they just happen to not have great of a hand, who knows. Alright guys, hope you found this exploratory video somewhat interesting. Make sure to let me know your thoughts, maybe you liked it or maybe you feel that this isn't worth doing as numbers may not be too meaningful. Certainly open to opinions. Take care guys.